The whine started as a faint, almost musical note beneath the familiar rumble of the Jeep's inline-six. I was 2 miles from home, my thoughts already on the weekend stretching ahead, a blank canvas of quiet hours with no flight schedules, no maintenance reports, just the crisp autumn air of rural Ohio. But a mechanic, even an aircraft mechanic on vacation, never really stops listening. The sound was a high-frequency complaint from the engine bay, a desperate thinning of the electrical system's voice. I tapped the gas, felt the needle on the ammeter flicker, weakly instead of surging with confidence. "Come on, old girl," I murmured, patting the cracked vinyl of the dashboard. "Not now." The 1986 Jeep Cherokee had been my project since college, a simple, honest machine. There was a directness to its mechanics that I found meditative after long days wrestling with the labyrinthine systems of an F-22 Raptor. On the fighter jet, a fault could be a cascade of a million interdependent parts, a ghost in the machine that required terabytes of data to exorcise. On the Jeep, a problem was usually a single, tangible thing, a worn bushing, a rusty bolt, a tired alternator. Like the one that was currently giving up the ghost. The whine pitched higher, taking on a reedy, breathless quality. The headlights, even in the afternoon gloom, dimmed perceptibly. I was turning onto my street, Sycamore Lane, a quiet ribbon of asphalt lined with aging maples. The engine coughed once, a final, polite protest, and then everything went silent. The rumble ceased, the dash lights winked out, and the steering wheel went heavy in my hands. I guided the rolling husk to the curb, the tires crunching on fallen leaves, and set the parking brake with a definitive click. Silence, the kind of deep, absolute silence you never get on the flight line. No shriek of jets, no clatter of tools, no constant, low hum of pressurized air and electricity. Just the sound of a light wind rustling the dry leaves and the distant bark of a dog. I sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, a faulty alternator. I was sure of it. The symptoms were textbook. I popped the hood, the latch releasing with a familiar, heavy clunk. The cloud of warm air that escaped smelled of hot metal and old oil, a comforting, honest smell. There it was, right on top, easily accessible, the alternator. A visual check confirmed it. The belt was tight, but the unit itself looked its age, a greasy, 37-year-old original. I could see the faintest glint of worn-out copper brush through a vent hole. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration startling in the quiet. I fished it out. Mom. "Hi, sweetie," her voice came through, warm and slightly anxious. "Are you home? I was just thinking about you." "Just pulled up, actually," I said, leaning against the warm fender. I saw no need to worry her with the Jeep. It was just a car problem. "How's everything?" "Oh, the usual. Your father's trying to assemble a new grill, and the instructions are in what looks like hieroglyphics." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Are you eating properly, Evie? I know how you get when you're on leave, just holed up with a book." "I'm eating fine, Mom. I made a big pot of chili last night." Good, plenty of protein." There was a pause. I could almost hear the worry gathering on the other end of the line. "It's just so quiet there all by yourself. No emergencies, no last-minute calls from the base." "No, Mom, it's just me and the Jeep, it's perfect." This was our dance. Lena Vance was immensely proud of her daughter, the Air Force captain, but the pride was perpetually braided with a deep maternal fear. To her, my world was one of deafening noise and unimaginable pressure, a place where a single mistake could mean catastrophe. Her world was one of well-balanced meals, reliable sedans, and the quiet concerns of suburban life. The two worlds rarely overlaid comfortably. "Well, you just promise me you'll relax. You work so hard. Those planes aren't going to fall out of the sky without you for a week." I smiled. "They have a whole team, Mom. Shark would call if the sky was actually falling." "You trust that Sergeant Johnson too much," she said, though there was no real criticism in it. She met Marcus Johnson once and had been utterly disarmed by his quiet, solid demeanor. "Okay, I'll let you go. Love you, honey." "Love you too, Mom." I hung up, the familiar warmth of her concern settling around me. It was a grounding weight, a tether to a life that had nothing to do with thrust-to-weight ratios or radar cross-sections. I looked back at the Jeep. The problem was simple. The solution, however, was complicated by my location. My own tools were back at my base housing, 2 hours away. I was visiting the house I'd grown up in, which my parents kept for weekend trips, and my childhood toolbox contained little more than a hammer and a screwdriver set for assembling IKEA furniture. A quick search on my phone confirmed the obvious. The only garage within 10 miles was Dawson's Auto Repair on the old state route. I knew the place, a squat cinderblock building with a sign that had faded from red to a pale pink. It had been there forever. I sighed, grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, and started the walk. It wasn't far, maybe half a mile. The air was cool and carried the smoky scent of burning leaves. It was a pleasant change from the jet fuel and hydraulic fluid that usually perfumed my days. Dawson's Auto Repair was exactly as I remembered it, only more so. The once paved lot was now more gravel and weed than asphalt. 2 rusting car skeletons sat off to the side, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The building itself was stained with decades of grime, and the air was thick with the pungent smell of used motor oil and gasoline. I pushed open the door, a bell jangling loudly overhead, and stepped into the gloom. The interior was a monument to organized chaos. Tools lay scattered on greasy workbenches, parts catalogs from a decade ago were stacked precariously on a filing cabinet, and the walls were plastered with faded pin-up calendars and posters for motor oil brands that probably didn't exist anymore. A radio tuned to a classic rock station crackled with static. From beneath a lifted pickup truck, a pair of oil-stained coverall legs protruded. A moment later, a man rolled out on a creeper. He was in his early 50s, with a broad face lined with years of squinting at engines, and a head of thick, graying hair that was mashed flat by a grimy baseball cap. He wiped his hands on an even grimier red rag, his eyes appraising me with a skepticism that felt immediate and automatic. This was Mark Dawson. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I hope so," I said, offering a small, polite smile. "My Jeep died on me just down the road. I think it's the alternator." He gave a short, non-committal grunt and finally stood up, his frame solid and heavy-set. "You think it's the alternator, huh?" He didn't wait for an answer. "What's it doing?" It started with a high-pitched whine from the engine bay, then the electrical systems failed sequentially before the engine cut out completely. The battery light came on just before it died. I kept my description clinical, factual. He listened, but his eyes were already glazing over, as if my words were a language he couldn't be bothered to decipher. He looked me up and down, taking in my jeans, my simple sweater, my clean hands. I saw his conclusion form in the set of his jaw. "Whining, you say, could be the alternator, could be the power steering pump, could be a dozen things. Ladies always hear whining." He chuckled at his own joke, a dry, humorless sound. "Where's the car?" "It's on Sycamore Lane, just past the creek." "I can have my boy tow it in later. We'll take a look Monday." "Monday?" I kept my voice level. "Is there any chance it could be looked at sooner? It's my only vehicle while I'm in town." He shook his head, the gesture final. "Nope, Friday afternoon, we're booked solid with real jobs." He gestured vaguely toward the bays, where only one other car, the pickup, was present. "Tell you what, you leave the keys. We'll diagnose it properly. No point you guessing at it." There it was, the gentle, paternalistic shove. I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the same focused patience I used when walking a young airman like Ben Carter through a complex diagnostic procedure. It was the patience required to let someone learn, to guide without commanding. But this was different. This wasn't a teaching moment. This was a dismissal. "I'm fairly certain it's the alternator," I repeated, my tone still neutral. "It's a straightforward job on that model. If you have the part, I could even." He cut me off with a laugh, a louder, more genuine sound this time. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. It was the sound of a man who has heard something so absurd it's genuinely amusing. He looked at me with a mix of pity and condescension. "You could even what? Honey, let's not make this more complicated than it is. You got a dead car? I fix dead cars. It's what I do." He took a step closer, the smell of sweat and grease becoming more pronounced. He leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret with a child. "Look, I appreciate you trying to help, but women and car engines, they just don't mix. It's not your fault. It's just not in your nature. All those wires and bolts, it's confusing." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just held his gaze, my hands hanging loosely at my sides. My mind flickered to the maintenance deck of an F-22, to the bewildering tapestry of composite panels, hydraulic lines, and miles of wiring I was responsible for. I thought of Shark Johnson handing me a torque wrench, his trust absolute. I thought of Ben Carter's wide, admiring eyes as I explained the harmonics of a turbine blade. 1,000 retorts lined up in my head, each one precise and devastating. I could have cited my qualifications, my experience, the fact that I was entrusted with weapons systems more complex than his entire existence. But I felt the weight of my week of leave ahead of me. The peace. The quiet. Arguing with this man, trying to prove my competence to someone who had already decided I had none, felt like a profound waste of energy. It would be like trying to explain color to someone who insisted on seeing in black and white. The principle of the thing itched at me, a nagging sense of injustice, but a deeper, more tired part of me, the part that craved the silence of Sycamore Lane, won out. Principle today was less important than peace. Mark Dawson saw my silence as surrender. He smiled, a patronizing, triumphant smile. He had restored order to his universe. He delivered the line with a tone of finality, a piece of homespun wisdom he truly believed. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Women can't fix cars, sweetheart. Leave it to the professionals. The word sweetheart hung in the oily air between us. I felt a cold spike of frustration, quickly banked. I simply nodded, a small, tight movement. I placed the Jeep's key on the counter next to a dusty cash register. It's the gray Cherokee on Sycamore. The registration is in the glove box. You got it, he said, his voice cheerful now that the natural order had been reaffirmed. We'll give you a call Monday with the estimate. I turned and walked out, the bell jangling my exit. The afternoon sun seemed exceptionally bright after the gloom of the garage. I didn't look back. I started the walk home, my boots scuffing on the gravel shoulder of the road. The mechanic's laughter seemed to follow me, not as a real sound, but as an echo in my memory, ringing with a smug, unshakable certainty. The frustration was there, a low simmer in my gut, but stronger than that was a profound sense of amusement. The sheer, staggering irony of it all. Mark Dawson, a man who struggled with the simple, mechanical logic of a 30-year-old Jeep, felt qualified to dismiss my understanding of machinery. He saw a young woman and made a calculation, and in his small, greasy world, that calculation was correct. It was almost beautiful in its simplicity. I thought of the professionals I worked with. Shark, with his encyclopedic knowledge of every squeak and rattle in a Raptors airframe. Young Carter, his hands steady as he calibrated a fuel flow sensor. The teams of engineers, technicians, and crew chiefs who turned a multi-million-dollar piece of stealth technology into a living, breathing weapon. That was professionalism. What I had just witnessed in Dawson's garage was something else entirely, a fragile ego propped up by the belittlement of others. As I turned onto my quiet street, the memory of the flight line surfaced, unbidden. The controlled chaos, the screaming engines, the intense focus, that was my reality. This, here, was an intermission. The condescension of a small-town mechanic was a speck of dust on the windshield of my life, insignificant and easily wiped away. Yet as I reached my front porch and fished my house key from my bag, the echo of his words lingered. Leave it to the professionals. I unlocked the door and stepped into the silent house. The only sound was the slow, steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stood in the stillness, and for the first time all day, I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. It was a small, private smile, born not of anger or a desire for revenge, but of a quiet, formidable certainty. He had no idea who he was talking to, and I saw no reason, at least for now, to enlighten him. The low hum of the C-17's engines was a vibration I felt more than heard, a constant through my headphones as I stared out the small window at the cloud floor below. It was a sound that meant movement, mission, a world away from the silent, stubborn weight of my Jeep on the side of a country road. That was Friday's problem. Today was Monday, and the sky was my office. By 700, I was pulling on my flight line boots in the locker room of the 122nd Aircraft Maintenance Unit, the scent of jet fuel, rubber, and industrial cleaner washing over me like a familiar cologne. The quiet of my vacation was a distant memory, replaced by the pre-mission buzz of the hangar, the shriek of a power tool, the distant whine of an auxiliary power unit firing up, the clipped, professional chatter of my team. This was a different kind of symphony, one I conducted. Captain on the flight line. A voice boomed as I pushed through the heavy double doors into the main hangar bay. As you were, I said, my voice calm but carrying. A few airmen snapped quick nods before turning back to their tasks. My eyes scanned the vast space, taking inventory. 2 F-22 Raptors sat in designated bays, their angular, stealthy forms looking less like machines and more like predators at rest. One, tail number 8416, had its access panels open, its innards exposed to the skilled hands of my crew. The other, 9501, stood pristine and silent, a testament to the work we'd completed last week. Senior Master Sergeant Marcus Johnson, Shark, detached himself from a group of mechanics clustered around 8416. He moved with the easy, confident gait of a man who'd spent more than 2 decades on this very line. His call sign, earned for his relentless focus during inspections, didn't match his dry, almost paternal demeanor, at least not with me. "Morning, Captain Vance," he said, falling into step beside me. "Vacation treat you, right? You get that Jeep situation sorted." He said Jeep situation with the same tone he might use for alien abduction, polite skepticism masking a complete inability to relate. "It's sorted for now, Shark. It's in a garage in town, Dawson's Auto Repair." He grunted, Dawson S., that the place with the giant plastic gorilla out front. "That's the one." Hope he knows which end of a wrench to hold. Shark's loyalty was absolute, but it extended to a deep-seated suspicion of anyone outside our tribe. In his world, if you weren't cleared to work on a $500 million fighter jet, your mechanical opinion was fundamentally suspect. As we approached the open panels of 8416, a younger airman, Ben Carter, looked up from a diagnostic computer. His face, still fresh with the eagerness of his first operational assignment, lit up with a mixture of respect and nerves. "Good morning, Captain." "Morning, Carter. What's the story?" I asked, my gaze already shifting from him to the complex schematics displayed on his screen. "Portside hydraulic pressure is reading erratic during pre-flight checks, ma'am. We've swapped the primary sensor, but the fluctuation persists. Sergeant Johnson thinks it might be a wiring issue deeper in the bay." Carter spoke quickly, his words tumbling out as if he'd been rehearsing his report. I leaned in, my eyes tracing the lines of data. The numbers danced, a subtle, inconsistent dip that most wouldn't notice. But most people aren't responsible for keeping a pilot alive at twice the speed of sound. This was my element. Not the quiet, singular failure of an alternator, but a complex, multivariable puzzle where the stakes were immeasurably high. A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp as the smell of hot metal. Tech school 8 years ago. A classroom buzzing with the tension of our first major practical exam, the torque wrench calibration. Our instructor, a master sergeant with a permanent scowl and biceps thicker than my thighs, had laid out the tools. "Precision isn't a suggestion, ladies and gentlemen," he'd barked, his eyes scanning the room, lingering for a moment too long on me, one of the few women in the cohort. "It's the difference between a mission accomplished and a smoking hole in the ground. This requires strength and a delicate touch. Don't assume you have both." The test was simple in theory. Calibrate a high-tension torque wrench to a specific, critical tolerance. But the wrenches were heavy, unforgiving instruments. You had to feel the click, a subtle vibration through the steel, not just hear it. Too little torque, a fitting comes loose. Too much, you strip the threads, ruin a multi-$1,000 component. I watched as classmates, big guys who looked the part, grunted and strained, their wrenches clicking with jarring force. When it was my turn, the master sergeant stood closer, arms crossed. I blocked him out. The weight of the wrench was nothing. It was about geometry, leverage, listening with your hands. I settled my stance, my grip firm but not tight. I focused on the flow of force, the minute feedback through the handle. I applied steady, increasing pressure, my entire world narrowed to the feel of the metal in my hands. Then, there it was, not a loud crack but a clean, precise snap, a tactile confirmation that resonated up my arms. I held the pressure, checked the digital readout. Perfect. Dead center of the tolerance band. I set the wrench down and met the instructor's gaze. He said nothing, just gave a slow, single nod. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. From that day on, the doubt in his eyes was replaced by a watchful expectation. I had learned my most important lesson early. Competence is a language everyone understands. Action trumps words every time. "Captain," Carter's voice pulled me back to the present. "Do you want to run a full-line pressure test?" I shook my head slightly, the ghost of the torque wrench fading. Not yet. A full test will take half the day. Let's be surgeons, not butchers. Carter, get me a stethoscope. He blinked. A stethoscope, ma'am. The electronic one, from the diagnostic kit. I allowed a small smile. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Shark shot me a knowing look. Going in for a listen, doc. If the system has a heartbeat, we can hear it, I said. Carter returned with the instrument, a sophisticated acoustic probe connected to a tablet. I took it, my fingers finding the familiar controls by touch. The hydraulic lines run right along here, I said, tracing a path along the aircraft's titanium skeleton with my other hand. An erratic pressure reading could be a faulty sensor, like you said, or it could be a tiny leak, a piece of debris in the line causing a temporary blockage, a pump cavitation. The pressure sensor only tells us the symptom. This. I held up the probe, listens for the cause. I guided Carter's hand, placing the probe's sensor head against a specific junction box. Don't press, just let it rest. You're listening for a change in the white noise. A hiss, a gurgle, a rhythmic tap that shouldn't be there. It's subtle, you have to shut out everything else. The flight line was deafening, the roar of an engine test in the distance, the clatter of tools, the constant rush of air from the environmental control system. But the probe was filtering it all, searching for the anomaly within the machine. We moved together, me directing, Carter listening with intense concentration. Shark watched, a silent pillar of support. After a few minutes, Carter's brow furrowed. There, ma'am, is that a kind of scraping sound? Very faint. I leaned in, my ear close to the headphones he was wearing. He was right. A faint metallic scrape, cyclical with the pump's operation. Good ear, Carter, that's not a leak, that's a physical obstruction. Probably a tiny shaving of metal from a manufacturing flaw, finally worked its way loose after 100 flight cycles. I straightened up. Shark, let's isolate that section of the line. We'll need to flush it and inspect the pump intake. Carter, you just saved us 6 hours of diagnostic work. The young airman's face flushed with pride. Just following your lead, Captain. For the next hour, we worked in coordinated silence, a well-practiced dance. I issued quiet instructions, Shark deployed the team with efficient precision, and Carter watched every move, absorbing the lesson. This was the heart of it. This was what I loved. The transfer of knowledge, the shared purpose, the tangible result of a problem solved. It was a world of clear cause and effect, where skill was the only currency that mattered. During a lull, as I was wiping grease from my hands with a clean rag, my personal phone vibrated in my thigh pocket. I rarely carried it on the line, but with my Jeep in the shop, I made an exception. The caller ID read Dawson's Auto. I stepped away from the aircraft, finding a slightly quieter spot near the hangar wall. The contrast was jarring. One moment, I was immersed in the controlled chaos of cutting-edge military technology. The next, I was holding a phone to my ear, trying to hear over the roar of a passing fighter taking off. Evelyn Vance, I answered. Ms. Vance, it's Mark Dawson. His voice was tinny and tight with frustration, a stark contrast to the calm professionalism surrounding me. Listen, about your Jeep. Yes, Mr. Dawson, is it ready? I kept my voice level polite. Ready? No, it's not ready. He let out a short, exasperated breath. I put the new alternator in just like you said, went to fire it up and nothing. Dead as a doornail. So I figured must be the battery, right? Drained itself trying to charge with a bad alt. Put a brand new battery in it this morning. I waited. The jet roar faded slightly, leaving a ringing in my ears. Still nothing, he continued, his tone edging toward accusatory. Not a click, not a crank. I've got a multimeter on it now, and I'm getting power everywhere I should. I don't get it. You're sure you didn't have any other problems with it? No weird electrical gremlins you forgot to mention? The implication was clear. This is your fault. You, a customer who couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of your own vehicle, failed to provide me with all the necessary information. I felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a weary recognition. This was the same condescension I'd faced my entire career, just packaged in a different uniform. It was the assumption that my expertise ended where my gender began, or in this case, where my Air Force uniform was taken off. I looked back at my team. Shark had paused, a hydraulic line in his hand, and was watching me, his head cocked slightly. He could sense the shift in my posture. I took a slow breath, the scent of jet fuel grounding me. Mr. Dawson, I told you it was the alternator. I diagnosed that on the side of the road. If the battery was drained, that's a direct result of the alternator failure. It's a simple circuit. I kept my voice patient, devoid of any emotion. I would not lecture him. I would not try to prove myself. If the new alternator and battery are installed correctly and you're getting power, then the issue is likely between the battery and the starter. A bad connection, a failed solenoid, a broken cable. There was a silence on the other end. I could almost hear him recalibrating. He'd expected confusion or perhaps apology. He'd gotten a concise, technical hypothesis. "Well, I'll have to keep digging, I guess," he said, his bluster deflated into confusion. "This old wiring can be a real headache." "I understand. Take your time. I'll be by to pick it up at the end of the week as we discussed." My tone was final. I offered no further help, no suggestion to check the grounding strap or the ignition switch. That was his job now. "Right, okay, I'll call you if I figure it out." He hung up without another word. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and rejoined the team. The smell of metal and fuel was a welcome return. Shark raised a single, bushy eyebrow. "Car trouble." "Something like that," I said, picking up a torque wrench. Its solid, familiar weight felt like an anchor. "Dawson's having a bit of a time with it." "Imagine that," Shark said dryly, a world of meaning in the three words. He didn't press further. He knew me well enough to know that some battles weren't worth fighting on the flight line. My world was here, with these machines and these people. Later, as the sun began to dip below the hangar doors, casting long shadows across the polished concrete, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. "Hi, sweetie," Lena's voice was warm, layered with a familiar undercurrent of anxiety. "I was just thinking about you. How was your first day back? Is that car still giving you fits? I worry about you being stranded." I leaned against a tool crib, watching Shark and Carter secure the last panel on 8416. The hydraulic line was flushed, the obstruction found, a sliver of metal no bigger than a fingernail clipping, and the system was now humming with perfect, stable pressure. A problem solved. "It's fine, Mom. The Jeep's at the shop. They're working on it." I didn't mention Dawson's frustration. There was no need to feed her worries. "Oh, good. I just hate the thought of you stuck somewhere. You work so hard, you deserve a reliable car." Her worry was a testament to her love, a tether to a life where a broken-down Jeep was a major crisis, not a minor inconvenience. "I'm not stuck, Mom. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And as I said it, watching my team finish their work under the harsh hangar lights, I knew it was the truth. The Jeep was a puzzle for another day. Today's puzzle was solved, the aircraft was safe, and my place in the world was reaffirmed, not by words, but by the quiet, formidable competence of a job done right. The acrid scent of high-test, jet fuel, and the low, electric hum of a flight line at work were my world. It was a symphony of controlled chaos I conducted with a calm hand and a quiet word. Tuesday morning sun baked the tarmac, creating shimmering mirages around the two F-22 Raptors parked in their bays. 8416, my problem child, had its access panels open, its innards exposed as Shark and Airman Carter worked with a diagnostic computer. 9501 stood sleek and silent, a predator ready to hunt, its stealth coating absorbing the light. This was my office, my domain, and the stubborn weight of my broken-down Jeep felt a million miles away. "Carter, what's the EGT reading on the port side turbine?" I asked, my voice calm but carrying easily over the ambient noise. I stood just outside the safety circle chalked around the aircraft, my flight line vest a garish orange badge of authority. The young airman, his face a mask of intense concentration, glanced from the screen to me. "Showing 850, Captain. Steady." "Good, Shark, cycle the bypass valve again. I want to see if that temperature fluctuation follows the command." Senior Master Sergeant Johnson, crouched near the forward landing gear with the grace of a man half his age, gave a curt nod. His hands moved with a practiced ease, flipping switches inside an open panel. "Cycling now." He didn't look at Carter or the screen, he was listening, his head cocked as the machinery within the fuselage whirred and clicked. "Hear that? Slight hitch right at the 3-second mark." "I hear it," I said. It was a faint, almost imperceptible catch in the smooth mechanical rhythm, the kind of detail you only learn to recognize after years of listening to these machines breathe. "Log it. Probable actuator wear. We'll pull it after this diagnostic." I made a note on my tablet. This was the dance. Find the anomaly, diagnose it, fix it. No drama, just precision. The $40 million price tag on this airframe was a constant, quiet pressure on my shoulders, a weight I carried not as a burden, but as a responsibility. This wasn't a clunky 1986 Jeep. There was no room for guesswork or condescending pats on the head. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a personal line. I ignored it. Out here, the mission came first. It buzzed again insistently, a flicker of annoyance quickly suppressed. It was probably my mother, Lena, checking in. She meant well, her worry a constant, gentle background hum in my life, but her timing was, as always, impeccably bad. I'd call her back during a lull. The phone stopped, then started again a minute later. This was unusual. I pulled it out, seeing the familiar number for Dawson's Auto Repair. A different kind of annoyance, colder and sharper, bloomed in my chest. What now? I let it go to voicemail. If it was Mark Dawson calling to tell me, again, in that paternalistic tone, that my little lady's grocery getter had stumped him, he could leave a message. I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Trouble, Captain?" Shark asked, standing up and stretching his back. His sharp eyes missed nothing. "Just the garage with my Jeep," I said, keeping my voice even. "Nothing urgent." He grunted, a sound that conveyed a universe of understanding. "Guy still can't find the dipstick." A small smile touched my lips, something like that. We returned to the F-22. The puzzle of the turbine actuator was a welcome distraction, a problem with a clear solution path. For the next 20 minutes, we were absorbed in the data, tracing electrical pathways and hydraulic lines on the schematics. The world narrowed to the hum of the jet, the smell of ozone and metal, the focused presence of my team. It was Shark who saw him first. His head came up, not with the sharp focus of a mechanical problem, but with the alertness of a senior NCO assessing a potential security breach. His gaze was fixed on the perimeter fence, near the pedestrian gate where the security forces patrols entered. "Cap," he said, his voice low, "we've got a civilian, looks lost and pissed." I followed his gaze. Across the expanse of hot tarmac, beyond the shimmering heat waves, a figure stood just inside the secure gate. He was holding a brown paper bag and staring, open-mouthed, at the scene before him. Even from a distance, I recognized the slightly stooped posture, the worn-out jeans, the salt-and-pepper hair. Mark Dawson. My first emotion was not anger, but a profound, weary disbelief. What in the world was he doing here? How had he even gotten on the flight line? Then the pieces, absurd and inevitable, clicked into place. The phone calls, the address on my registration. He'd brought the Jeep to me. He'd come to explain it to the husband. "That's him, isn't it?" Shark murmured, his voice dangerously quiet. "The mechanic." I simply nodded, my eyes locked on the stunned figure. I watched as Dawson's head swiveled slowly, taking in the massive hangars, the armed security police, the other airmen moving with purpose around multi-million-dollar aircraft. His gaze swept over the two F-22s, lingering on the sinister, angular lines of 9501. Then his eyes found the large, stenciled placard mounted on the fence near our bay. 122nd Aircraft Maintenance Unit. Aircraft Commander, Capt. E. Vance. I saw his body go rigid. The paper bag in his hand seemed to droop. His head snapped back to me. I was standing there in my flight line gear, my radio crackling with status reports, the massive, sleek form of the Raptor looming behind me like a metallic guardian. Shark and Carter were looking to me, awaiting my next instruction. Time seemed to compress, the sounds of the flight line fading to a distant roar. Across the 100 yards of hot asphalt, our eyes met. There was no mistaking the journey happening in his. The initial confusion melted into dawning, horrifying comprehension. The patronizing garage owner who had talked down to a young lady was gone, replaced by a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been upended. The hobby wasn't changing oil. The project wasn't a rusty sedan. The captain was a man he needed to enlight. I didn't move. I didn't smile smugly or glare in triumph. I just held his gaze, my expression neutral, my posture the same calm, authoritative stance I'd held all morning. I let him look. I let him see the placard, the jet, the crew, and me, the undeniable center of it all. The quiet, formidable competence he had dismissed was now displayed on a stage he couldn't have even imagined. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He looked down at his boots, then back up, as if hoping the scene would change. It didn't. The humiliation was a physical force radiating from him, so palpable I could almost feel its heat competing with the sun-baked tarmac. He took a half step backward, as if he'd been pushed. Shark broke the silence, his voice a low growl meant only for me. "You want me to have security escort him out, Captain?" I took a slow breath, the air tasting of jet fuel and resolution. "No, Sergeant," I said, my voice steady. I finally broke the gaze with Dawson, turning back to my team, to my real work. "He's not a threat, just a man who took a wrong turn." I looked at the open panels of 8416. "Carter, let's get that actuator tagged for removal. We're burning daylight." As I turned my back on Mark Dawson, I felt a surge of something clean and sharp. It wasn't vengeance. It was vindication. It was the silent, absolute confirmation that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The clanging discord of my interaction with him was finally silenced by the roaring truth of my existence here on the flight line. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a security forces airman approach Dawson, saying something to him. Dawson nodded jerkily, still unable to tear his eyes away from me. He turned and shuffled back toward the gate, a suddenly small and defeated figure retreating from a world too vast and powerful for his narrow understanding. The chapter of my vacation, of the broken Jeep and the condescending mechanic, was closed. The faint, smug satisfaction I felt was a private thing, a quiet settling of accounts, but it was fleeting. There was an F-22 with a faulty actuator that needed my attention, a mission to prepare for, and a team that relied on my focus. I pushed everything else aside, the image of Dawson's stunned face already fading like a ghost in the bright, hard light of the tarmac. The real work was just beginning. The low afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows of the chain-link fence across the tarmac as I walked towards the base's main gate. The air still carried the day's heat, a dry metallic warmth that smelled of jet fuel and distant thunderstorms. My gait was even, my posture straight, the familiar weight of my toolbox a comfortable anchor in my hand. Inside, the persistent buzz from my phone had finally ceased, replaced by a single text from my mother. "Mark Dawson called the house. He sounds upset." "Everything okay, sweetie?" I texted her a quick, "Car-s fixed. All good. Call you tonight," before heading out. The lie was a kindness. The car wasn't fixed and Mark Dawson wasn't upset. He was terrified. I spotted him before he saw me. He was standing just outside the pedestrian entrance, shifting his weight from one worn work boot to the other, looking profoundly out of place against the backdrop of military precision. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his oil-stained jeans, and his shoulders were hunched as if expecting a physical blow. The bluster he'd worn like a second skin in his garage 2 days ago had completely evaporated. As I approached, he flinched, his eyes wide. Captain Vance, ma'am." "Mr. Dawson," I said, my voice level. I came to a stop a few feet from him, setting my toolbox down with a soft thud. The polished Air Force blue metal contrasted sharply with the grime-covered concrete. He began to stammer, the words tumbling out in a rushed, incoherent jumble. I don't know what to the Jeep, it's just, I had it all apart, I swear, the timing was, and then the new module, it just wouldn't, and I got your mother's number from your paperwork, I thought maybe she could, but then I realized, oh hell." He ran a greasy hand through his thinning hair, his gaze darting everywhere but my face. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I've made a real mess of it." I let the silence hang for a moment after his torrent of words subsided. A C-17 Globemaster thundered down the runway a half-mile away, the deep roar momentarily drowning out the hum of the base. Dawson flinched again at the sound. He was a man used to the grumble of V8 engines, not the earth-shaking power of turbofans. "The keys?" I asked, my tone not unkind, but offering no comfort either. He fumbled in his pocket and produced my keychain, the simple metal tab with the Jeep logo looking small and insignificant in his thick, calloused hand. I took it. And the repair bill. He produced a crumpled invoice from his back pocket, smoothed it nervously against his thigh, and handed it over. I scanned it quickly. Fuel pump, ignition control module, labor. A significant sum for a weekend's worth of incorrect work. "The Jeep is where?" I asked. "Just there, ma'am, in the visitor's lot." He pointed a trembling finger towards my old Wagoneer, looking forlorn and abandoned in a sea of sensible sedans and government vehicles. I nodded and picked up my toolbox. "Let's take a look." I led the way, my footsteps measured and sure. His trailed behind, hesitant and scuffing. I popped the hood, the familiar creak of the old hinges a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. The engine bay was a mess. Wires were draped loosely, connectors were unhooked, and the new, shiny fuel pump stood out like a sore thumb amidst the original, grimy components. Dawson had torn the heart out of the old girl and failed to put it back together correctly. I didn't need to ask what he'd done. The evidence was plain. I unlatched my toolbox, the well-organized interior a testament to my trade. I bypassed the complex diagnostic computer I used for the Raptor and went straight for the fundamentals, a simple multimeter. The problem, I said, more to myself than to him, is rarely the most expensive part. It's almost always the simplest thing you overlooked. I clipped the ground lead of the multimeter to the battery's negative terminal. The engine block of the Jeep was grounded to the chassis, but on a vehicle this old, corrosion was the silent killer. I probed a clean-looking bolt on the block itself. The multimeter's screen flickered, showing a resistance that was far too high. A bad ground. The entire engine was starved for a proper return path. It would cause intermittent power loss, stalling, a no-start condition, exactly the symptoms I'd described to him. Dawson leaned in, his brow furrowed, but I checked for continuity. "You checked the battery cables," I said, not looking up. "You didn't check the engine's ground to the frame." I found the braided ground strap connecting the engine block to the firewall. It looked intact, but where it bolted to the frame, there was a faint white crust of oxidation. 30 years of Midwestern winters had taken their toll. I took a wire brush from my kit, scraped the contact point on the frame until bare metal shone through, tightened the bolt, and then reprobed with the multimeter. The reading dropped to 0. Perfect. I put the tools away, closed the multimeter's case with a soft click, and turned to Dawson. "Try it now." He looked from me to the Jeep, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. He slid into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine cranked once, twice, and then roared to life with a healthy, steady rumble. It idled perfectly. He revved it gently, the engine responding without a hint of hesitation. He shut it off. The sudden silence felt heavier than the engine noise had been. He got out of the Jeep slowly, like a man 20 years older than his age. The color had drained from his face. He just watched me fix in 30 seconds what he had failed to diagnose in 2 days. The gulf between his competency and mine wasn't just wide, it was existential. He was a capable mechanic in his world of alternators and brake pads. I lived in a world where a single misdiagnosis could lead to a catastrophe measured in hundreds of millions of dollars and human lives. The standards were different, the stakes were everything. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared at the spot on the frame I'd cleaned, a task so simple a teenager could have done it. I took the crumpled bill from where I'd placed it on the fender. "What's the total?" "No," he whispered, finally finding his voice. It was rough with emotion. "No, Captain, please, there's no charge. God, after that, I can't take your money." "The bill, Mr. Dawson," I repeated, my voice calm but leaving no room for argument. He swallowed hard. $874.50. I took my wallet from my back pocket, extracted my personal credit card, and handed it to him. He stared at it as if it were a live snake. "I can't," he said again, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "Let me make this right. Let me comp the parts at least, something." "You performed the work you believed was necessary," I said. "You are entitled to payment for your labor and parts." He processed this for a moment, the concept of integrity in the face of his own failure seeming to baffle him. With trembling hands, he pulled a portable card reader from his truck and processed the transaction. I signed the screen with a quick, practiced stroke and tucked the card back into my wallet. I took my copy of the receipt and folded it neatly, putting it away without looking at it. I closed the hood of the Jeep. The sound echoed faintly in the quiet lot. Dawson stood there, a broken man. The condescending patriarch of his small-town garage had been dismantled not by anger or revenge, but by a quiet, effortless display of skill. I had not raised my voice. I had not belittled him. I had simply shown him what true competence looked like. I looked him in the eye for the first time since I'd arrived. The paternalistic smirk was gone, replaced by a raw, humbled respect. "A good mechanic knows their tools," I said, my voice soft but clear in the space between us. "A great mechanic knows their limitations. The bill is paid. The matter is closed." I didn't wait for a response. I got into the Jeep, the familiar worn leather of the seat comforting beneath me. The engine started instantly. I put it in gear and pulled away, leaving Mark Dawson standing alone by his truck, a solitary figure shrinking in my rearview mirror, forever changed by a 30-second lesson. The drive back to the maintenance hangar was short. The Wagoneer's steady purr was a satisfying counterpoint to the morning's frustration. I parked in my designated spot, the shadow of the immense hangar engulfing the small vehicle. Stepping out, the atmosphere was different. The frantic energy of the initial diagnostic phase on the Raptor had subsided, replaced by the focused hum of precision work. I changed back into my flight line gear in the quiet of my office, the familiar weight of the Nomex feeling like a second skin. Walking onto the hangar floor was like coming home. The air was cool and smelled of aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and clean metal. The F-22, 8416, sat in the center of the bay, its panels open like a patient in surgery. My team moved around it with a quiet purpose, their actions economical and sure. I had just finished reviewing the maintenance logs on a tablet when I sensed a presence beside me. Senior Master Sergeant Marcus Johnson stood there, holding 2 steaming cardboard cups. He handed one to me without a word. I took it, the heat seeping through the cup into my hands. It was coffee, black, the way we both took it. He took a sip from his own cup, his eyes scanning the activity around the Raptor. His gaze was sharp, missing nothing. After a moment, he turned his head slightly towards me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his eyes. "Car trouble, Captain?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I brought the coffee to my lips, the bitter, familiar taste grounding me. A real smile, the first genuine one all day, broke across my face. I looked from Shark's knowing expression to Airman Carter, who was carefully torquing a bolt on the bypass valve actuator, his face a mask of concentration. I saw the other members of my team, each one a specialist, each one trusting me to lead them, to make the right calls. "Nothing that couldn't be handled, Sergeant," I replied, my voice quiet. He gave a single, slow nod. No more words were needed. He knew. He understood the weight of command, the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem, the profound difference between earning respect through action and demanding it through title. The exchange with Dawson was already fading, a minor irritation in the rearview. The smell of jet fuel, the feel of a warm coffee cup, the sight of my team working in perfect sync on one of the most complex machines ever built, this was my validation. It wasn't something you could argue with a stranger. It was something you built, day by day, bolt by bolt, with the respect of the people who mattered. I took another sip of coffee, my eyes resting on the sleek, predatory lines of the Raptor. The faulty actuator had been replaced, the system reassembled. It was time for the test. I gave a nod to the crew chief standing by. The order was given. The ground power unit whined, feeding electricity into the fighter's systems. From the cockpit, the pilot went through the start sequence. There was a whir, a series of clicks, and then a low, guttural whine that quickly built into a deafening, pure roar as the Pratt & Whitney F-119 engine spooled to life. The sound wasn't just noise. It was raw, contained power, a physical force that vibrated in my chest and resonated deep in my bones. It was a sound I was responsible for. A sound I understood completely, from the first spark in the combustion chamber to the thunderous thrust exiting the nozzle. It was the sound of everything being right in my world. I stood there, perfectly still, and listened until the engine was shut down, the silence that followed ringing with its absence, a testament to the power that had been there and would be there again, ready when called upon.